She lived in a small, quiet town where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. She had a life that many would call ordinary. Every day she woke up early, made breakfast for herself and her little family, went to her job at the local library, and returned home in the evening to do the chores that never seemed to end. Her apartment was simple, with faded curtains and a few pictures on the walls. But it had one corner that was entirely hers. In that corner sat an old piano, a hand-me-down from a neighbor who had moved away, and on it rested a stack of sheet music that had grown worn at the edges. It wasn't a grand piano, but it was hers, and it was where she could escape into a world that felt larger than her small town, a world where she could breathe freely. From a young age, music had been her refuge. She remembered sitting at the piano as a child, pressing the keys slowly at first, feeling the vibration under her fingers, and letting the notes carry her away. Life had taught her that dreams often stayed dreams, but music was different. Music listened. It never judged. Every time she played, it was as if the world faded, leaving only the melody and her heartbeat intertwined. She didn't play to impress anyone. She didn't play to be famous or recognized. She played because it reminded her that she had a part of herself that was untouched by ordinary worries, bills, and responsibilities. Her co-workers at the library often noticed the small notebook she carried everywhere. It was filled with handwritten notes about music theory, favorite pieces, and sometimes little sketches of melodies she imagined. Occasionally, someone would ask her why she didn't perform publicly. She would smile and shrug, saying she wasn't ready. The truth was, she didn't know if anyone would care. She had seen young, talented musicians in the town perform, their fingers flying across shiny pianos, their eyes bright with confidence. She felt like an outsider looking in, someone who could admire the art, but never belong to it. Despite that, she kept practicing every evening. She would sit at her piano after work, sometimes until the late hours, letting the music guide her fingers. Her family had grown used to the sound of scales and melodies filling the apartment. Her neighbor once remarked that the music seemed to make the walls of her small home disappear, and she had laughed softly. Though she didn't always feel like the music would ever go beyond these walls. One afternoon, she noticed a small poster at the library bulletin board. It was for a local music competition, an annual event that drew musicians from neighboring towns. The words seemed to leap off the paper. Show your talent, be heard, share your music. Her heart skipped a beat. For days, she thought about it, her mind filled with both excitement and fear. Could she really do it? Could she take her music beyond her quiet apartment and step into a world that she had only observed from afar? The thought was terrifying, yet there was a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, she imagined herself on a stage, with people listening to her play, not just glancing at her, but truly listening. She began to prepare quietly. Every evening, she chose pieces that resonated with her deepest emotions. She wanted to play something that would speak from her heart, not just display skill. Her hands, calloused from years of practice, seemed to remember melodies she had almost forgotten. She would close her eyes and imagine the audience before her, their faces turning from polite curiosity to rapt attention as she poured her soul into the music. She practiced until the notes felt like extensions of her own voice, until her fingers could move across the keys without hesitation, carrying the weight of every emotion she had ever felt. Her friends and family noticed a change. There was a new light in her eyes, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. When her sibling asked if she was really going to audition, she nodded but didn't speak much. She felt that this journey was hers alone. Each day, she battled with self-doubt, wondering if she was stepping into a world where she didn't belong. Yet, each evening at the piano reminded her that her music had value, even if only she could hear it. She imagined the audition hall in her mind, the bright lights, the polished floor, the long line of young musicians who looked confident, some even arrogant. She could almost hear the whispers, the subtle laughter at the sight of someone who didn't fit the expected image of a performer. She knew that people might underestimate her, but she tried to push those thoughts aside. She reminded herself of the nights spent alone at the piano, the times when her heart had spoken through the music in ways words never could. The days passed quickly. She juggled her daily responsibilities with her secret preparation, each moment at the piano sharpening her resolve. She began recording herself on a small phone, listening back to hear if the emotion in her playing reached beyond the keys. Sometimes, she cried when the music stirred something deep inside her, a mixture of longing, hope, and the quiet sadness of years spent in the shadows. But the tears were also cleansing. They strengthened her courage. On the morning of the audition, she woke early, her nerves buzzing like electricity under her skin. She dressed simply, choosing comfort over style, as she didn't want to worry about appearances. Her hands trembled slightly as she packed her sheet music and walked out the door. But there was also a sense of anticipation that made her steps lighter than usual. As she walked through the town, people waved at her in passing, unaware of the small, monumental step she was about to take. To them, it was just another day. To her, it was a day that could change everything. When she arrived at the hall, she paused for a moment outside. The building was grander than anything she had imagined, with high ceilings, polished floors, and the soft echo of footsteps that made her heart pound. She peeked inside and saw other contestants, some tuning their instruments, others practicing last-minute scales. Their eyes glanced at her, some with polite curiosity, others with barely concealed amusement. She felt the familiar sting of self-doubt, but she took a deep breath and reminded herself of the music that had guided her through so many quiet nights. She approached the registration desk, her sheet music clutched tightly in her hands. The clerk smiled and handed her a number, welcoming her with a cheerful tone. She nodded, offering a small smile in return. Though her mind was spinning with anticipation and anxiety, she found a corner to sit, taking a moment to close her eyes and imagine herself at the piano, letting the music flow through her, connecting her to every quiet hour she had spent preparing. As the audition time drew closer, she observed the other contestants. Some were young and confident, their eyes shining with certainty. Others were seasoned musicians, moving with practiced grace and ease. She felt like an ordinary person among extraordinary talents. But she reminded herself that music was not about appearances. It was about heart. It was about telling a story with each note, each pause, each breath. And she had a story to tell, one that had been waiting for this moment for many years. When her number was called, she stood, her legs slightly shaky, but her resolve firm. She walked to the stage, her eyes briefly scanning the audience. The faces blurred into a mixture of curiosity, expectation, and polite judgment. She felt the whispers and the subtle glances, some questioning why someone like her would dare to perform here. But she also felt the quiet strength of every hour she had spent alone at the piano, the resilience built from years of nurturing her passion in secret. She took a deep breath and sat at the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, feeling the familiar texture of the worn ivory. Then, slowly, she began to play. The first notes were gentle, tentative, almost shy, as if testing the waters of this new world. But soon, the music began to flow naturally, each note carrying the emotions she had kept hidden, each melody a reflection of her inner life. The ordinary woman, laughed at and underestimated, was about to show the world a part of herself that could not be ignored. As she sat at the piano, the soft glow of the stage lights made her heart pound faster than ever before. The hall was silent except for the distant hum of footsteps and the occasional rustle of paper. She could feel the weight of the audience's eyes, even though most of the people were still waiting for their numbers to be called. She tried to calm herself by remembering all the evenings she had spent practicing alone, her fingers moving effortlessly over the keys, her heart completely immersed in the music. This was no different. She had prepared for this moment, and she owed it to herself to play as if the music had always belonged here. Her fingers touched the first keys, producing a sound that felt both fragile and strong. She hesitated for only a second before letting the melody flow. She was aware of a few people whispering and looking at her with thinly veiled amusement. Their subtle glances made her stomach twist for a moment, but she pushed the doubt aside. She reminded herself that music was not about appearances, it was about emotion. Every note she played told a story, one of years spent in quiet determination, of nights filled with longing, and of the courage it took to follow her passion despite the smallness of her world. As she continued, the melody began to grow, expanding in both confidence and beauty. Her fingers moved with surprising precision, guided not only by memory, but by the emotions that had fueled every hour of practice. The whispers slowly faded, replaced by an attentive silence. The audience, at first skeptical, began to notice the unexpected skill in her performance. The music she created was simple yet profound, touching places within that no one could anticipate. Even the young musicians who had been chatting and laughing quietly earlier straightened up in their chairs, their eyes fixed on her as if trying to understand how someone so ordinary could produce something so extraordinary. She felt herself becoming part of the music, losing track of time and space. The hall, The audience, the judgment, all of it disappeared. She played with everything she had, her heart and soul pouring into each note. The melody rose and fell like waves, carrying emotions that could not be expressed in words. She thought of her quiet apartment, the late nights of practice, the moments when she had almost given up, and the persistent whisper in her heart that said she could do this. Now, all of that had culminated in this performance. She realized that her fear of ridicule had been nothing compared to the power of her own determination. The judges, who had been politely observing, could not hide their astonishment. They leaned forward slightly, eyes widening, as the ordinary woman before them transformed into a musician of profound depth and sensitivity. Each note seemed to reveal layers of life experience, every pause between chords filled with emotion that demanded attention. She noticed a few heads turning, whispers turning into gasps of surprise. It was as if the music itself had created a space where everyone had to stop and listen, to acknowledge the truth she had carried quietly all these years. In the midst of her performance, she felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time, she realized that this was not about winning a competition or seeking validation from others. It was about showing the world, if only for a few moments, that passion, dedication, and courage could defy expectations. She allowed herself to smile subtly as her fingers danced across the keys, feeling a connection not only to the music but to every person in the hall. She could sense that they were being moved, not just by technical skill, but by authenticity. And authenticity, she thought, had a power that talent alone could never match. Suddenly, she became aware of a young musician in the front row who had been watching her intently. His expression had changed from skepticism to admiration. He whispered something to his friend, and they both leaned forward, unable to look away. The realization struck her that she was breaking through not only the audience's expectations, but also the barriers that had kept her from seeing herself as capable. Every note she played became a declaration that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things if they dared to try. Her hands were moving quickly now, almost as if they had a life of their own. The music swelled and softened, telling a story that seemed to extend far beyond the hall, reaching into the hearts of those who listened. She felt the energy in the room shift. The earlier laughter, the judgmental glances, the doubt, all of it had vanished. In its place was an atmosphere of awe, of people recognizing something rare and beautiful in front of them. The ordinary woman they had underestimated was no longer just an observer. She was the center of a moment that felt timeless. The piece began to wind down, each note deliberate, measured, as if savoring the final moments. Her fingers lingered on the keys, drawing out a soft, lingering sound that resonated through the hall. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with emotion. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than applause, a silence that acknowledged a transformation had taken place, not just in the music, but in everyone present. She took a small breath and looked up, seeing faces that were no longer skeptical, but open, moved, and filled with respect. Then, slowly, the clapping began, at first tentative, then building into a strong, steady rhythm that seemed to shake the very walls. Some people stood, others remained seated but clapped enthusiastically, their expressions reflecting amazement. The judges, too, exchanged glances of surprise, nodding in appreciation. She realized that she had done more than perform. She had touched something inside people, something they hadn't expected to find in someone they had dismissed as ordinary. As she rose from the piano, a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration washed over her. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the intensity of emotion she had poured into the performance. The whispers of ridicule had vanished, replaced by murmurs of admiration and curiosity. She had stepped into a world where she had felt out of place, and yet, she had found her voice. She felt an unfamiliar, but welcome warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling that validation, while sweet, was secondary to the joy of expressing her true self. Walking off the stage, she noticed that a few contestants, who had earlier seemed dismissive, now approached her with cautious respect. Some offered small smiles, others gave nods of acknowledgement. She returned their gestures quietly, feeling a new sense of belonging, even if she did not yet fully understand it. It was a strange sensation, to be seen for who she truly was, not for appearances or expectations, but for the depth and honesty she had shared through her music. Outside the hall, she took a few moments to breathe in the cool air. The world felt different somehow, as if the performance had changed her perspective. She realized that her life, while still ordinary in many ways, had gained a new layer of meaning. She had taken a risk, confronted her fears, and allowed herself to be vulnerable in front of strangers. And in doing so, she had discovered a strength she had always possessed, but had never fully acknowledged. For days afterward, she replayed the experience in her mind, not focusing on the applause or recognition, but on the way she had felt while playing, the sense of connection, the flow of music, the transformation of doubt into confidence. She knew that this was only the beginning, that there would be more auditions, more opportunities, and more challenges. Yet, she also knew that she could face them with the knowledge that her passion and perseverance could carry her further than she had ever imagined. Even as she returned to her simple life, her routine unchanged on the surface, something had shifted deep inside her. Every evening at her piano felt different now. She played with renewed vigor, inspired by the memory of the whole, the audience, and the feeling of her music resonating beyond her own walls. The whispers of doubt that had haunted her for years no longer had the same power. She had proven to herself that she belonged in the world of music, not because anyone else said so, but because she had taken the leap and embraced her gift fully. In quiet moments, she would think back to the faces in the hall, the subtle disbelief transforming into wonder. She understood that the journey was not about impressing others, but about honoring her own love for music. That realization gave her a sense of freedom she had never felt before, and with every note she played thereafter, she carried with her the memory of that moment, a reminder that ordinary people could surprise the world when they chose to step forward and share their true selves. As the ordinary woman sat back down at the piano for her next piece, a quiet determination settled over her. The applause from the previous performance still echoed in her ears, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the music that awaited her fingers. This piece was different. It required more skill, more emotion, and a level of control she had never dared to display publicly. She felt a familiar nervous flutter in her stomach, but reminded herself that she had spent countless evenings mastering every note, perfecting every pause, and feeling every chord in her heart before ever playing it out loud. The audience had begun to settle, some leaning forward in curiosity, others still exchanging surprised glances about the depth of talent they had just witnessed. She could sense a mixture of anticipation and doubt in the room. A few whispers circulated about how unexpected her abilities were. Given her plain appearance and quiet demeanor, she ignored them, letting the music guide her as her fingers touched the keys. The first notes were soft and deliberate, almost as if testing the waters of this new challenge. But soon, she let go, allowing the melody to flow naturally, each phrase more confident than the last. This piece was intricate, demanding not only technical skill, but an emotional honesty that could not be faked. As her hands moved across the keys, the audience began to lean in, captivated by the contrast between the music's delicacy and its power. Her fingers danced with precision, conveying a story that words could never express. She thought of every quiet evening spent in her apartment, the late nights of practice, the moments when self-doubt had threatened to overwhelm her. Each note became a testament to those experiences, a way of sharing her journey without speaking a word. The room grew silent except for the sound of the piano. Every listener seemed to be holding their breath, caught in the spell of the music. Some closed their eyes, allowing themselves to feel the emotion behind each note. Others stared at her in astonishment, struggling to reconcile the ordinary appearance of the woman with the extraordinary music she created. It was a transformation that went beyond talent. It was the authenticity of her performance that resonated so deeply. The music had a life of its own, flowing through her, over her, and into the hearts of everyone in the hall. She could feel the rhythm of the piece pulsing through her. The technical passages required focus and dexterity, and she navigated them with the ease of years of practice. Each chord struck with intention, each pause weighed with emotion. She became aware of small reactions in the audience, a slightly raised eyebrow, a subtle nod, the occasional quick intake of breath. These tiny responses reminded her that the music was reaching people in a way that words never could. For a moment, it wasn't about competition or judgment, it was about connection. Her mind drifted to memories from her past, a teacher who had once told her that she had potential, but would never be extraordinary, neighbors who had commented on how she wasted time on the piano, and friends who had never understood her devotion to music. Those memories gave her strength rather than doubt. Each note she played became an answer to the skepticism she had faced for years, a quiet declaration that passion and dedication could overcome expectations. She played with a freedom she had never known, letting her emotions guide her hands instead of fear. As the piece progressed, the melody became more complex, intertwining soft, delicate passages with bold, sweeping sections. The audience could no longer look away. Some were visibly moved, their eyes glistening with emotion. A few younger musicians exchanged glances of disbelief, whispering among themselves about how someone so unassuming could possess such mastery. Even the judges, who had witnessed countless auditions over the years, leaned forward, intrigued and clearly impressed by the depth and nuance of her performance. She was aware of her own heartbeat, quick and steady, matching the rhythm of the music. She felt a sense of exhilaration mixed with vulnerability, knowing that every emotion she had felt in her life was being expressed through her fingers. It was a release, a catharsis, and a moment of truth. The ordinary woman who had been laughed at, underestimated, and overlooked was revealing her soul through the piano, and in doing so, she created a space where everyone in the room was compelled to listen and feel. At one point, the piece reached a particularly challenging passage, demanding precise coordination and control. She hesitated for the briefest of moments, feeling the pressure of the audience's gaze. Then she reminded herself of the countless hours she had spent practicing, of the nights she had pushed herself to perfect every phrase. She let her hands move with confidence, trusting her own skill and intuition. The passage passed flawlessly, and she felt a rush of satisfaction, a confirmation that her preparation and dedication had prepared her for this moment. The music then transitioned into a softer, more introspective section. She leaned into it, allowing the emotion to fill the room. Each note seemed to hang in the air, resonating with the listeners in ways she could only imagine. She felt a connection to the audience that transcended words, the universal language of music, bridging the gap between her experiences and theirs. It was a rare and beautiful sensation, one that made her feel both vulnerable and empowered at the same time. As the final notes approached, she slowed her tempo, letting the music linger and breathe. The hall was completely silent now, every ear tuned to the final chords. Her fingers pressed the last notes with a delicate touch, and the sound lingered in the air, fading slowly into silence. The effect was immediate and profound. The audience remained still for a heartbeat longer than usual, as if reluctant to break the spell that had been woven. Then, slowly, a ripple of applause began, growing steadily into a wave of appreciation that filled the room. People stood, some wiping tears from their eyes, others clapping enthusiastically, all expressing their admiration in different ways. She rose from the piano, her hands trembling slightly from the intensity of the performance. The judges exchanged impressed glances, murmuring among themselves. She felt a mix of relief, pride, and exhilaration. For the first time, she truly understood the power of her music, not just in her own private world, but in the hearts of others. As she stepped off the stage, a few contestants approached her, some offering congratulations, others simply nodding with respect. Even those who had once laughed or dismissed her earlier could not deny what they had witnessed. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not from recognition, but from the knowledge that she had faced her fears and shared her gift authentically. That was more important than any award, any applause, or any title backstage. She took a few moments to collect herself. Her heart was still racing, but she felt a sense of calm satisfaction settling over her. She thought about her journey, the quiet hours spent practicing alone, the self-doubt, the encouragement she had found within herself. All of it had led to this moment. She realized that music had always been her companion, her teacher, and her refuge. Now, it had also become a bridge connecting her to others, allowing them to experience a piece of her life and her heart. Walking out of the hall later that day, she felt a lightness in her step. The ordinary world she had returned to after the performance seemed brighter, richer, and more alive. She knew that life would continue with its routines and responsibilities, but she also understood that something fundamental had changed within her. She had discovered that courage, dedication, and authenticity could transform ordinary moments into extraordinary experiences. In the days that followed, she reflected on the performance often. She remembered the way the audience had shifted from doubt to awe, how every note had carried her emotions and connected with listeners on a deeper level. She realized that this was just the beginning, that there would be more challenges, more performances, and more opportunities to share her music. But now, she faced the future with a newfound confidence, knowing that her ordinary life could be infused with extraordinary moments. Whenever she dared to embrace her passion fully, even in her quiet apartment, the piano became more than an instrument. It became a symbol of her courage and persistence. Every evening, as she played, she remembered the faces in the hall, the expressions of surprise and admiration, and the knowledge that she had made a difference through her music. She had proven, first to herself and then to others, that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they followed their hearts and believed in their own abilities. The applause had barely settled when she stepped off the stage, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. Her hands still tingled from the intensity of the music, and her heart was racing. But there was a sense of peace that ran deeper than anything she had ever felt before. People in the audience were talking in low voices, some leaning over to comment to their neighbors, others looking around in disbelief, as if trying to understand how someone so ordinary could produce something so extraordinary. She moved quietly backstage, taking a deep breath and allowing herself a moment to savor what had just happened. The judges called her over, their expressions a mix of surprise and admiration. They had seen many performers in their careers, but few had left such a profound impact. One of them, an older man with a kind face, smiled warmly and said that her performance had been filled with emotion and depth. Another judge, usually reserved and stern, nodded and mentioned how technically precise yet heartfelt her playing had been. She listened to their words, still trying to process the reality that the people who evaluated talent professionally were genuinely impressed by her music. She felt a rush of pride, not in arrogance, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her dedication and practice had truly been recognized. Back in the audience, whispers had turned into animated conversations. A few of the contestants who had initially laughed or doubted her approach came forward, some offering congratulations, others simply shaking their heads in awe. One young musician admitted that he had underestimated her, and now he felt inspired to practice harder and to approach his own music with more sincerity. Another remarked quietly to a friend that the experience had reminded her that appearances could be deceiving and that true talent often came from unexpected places. These reactions warmed her heart, and she felt a connection to the people around her in a way she had never anticipated. Outside the hall, reporters and photographers had gathered, drawn by the unusual story of an ordinary woman who had stunned a skeptical audience. They asked questions, eager to understand her background, her preparation, and how she had overcome the fear and doubt that so often held others back. She answered simply, speaking from the heart. She explained that music had always been a part of her life, a companion during quiet nights, a source of joy and comfort. She spoke about the countless hours of practice, the belief in herself even when others doubted her, and the courage it had taken to step onto the stage. Her honesty resonated, and the reporters nodded, clearly moved by her story. At home that evening, she reflected on the day's events, the memory of the stage, the applause, and the faces of those who had watched her with astonishment filled her mind. She realized that the experience had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the recognition or the praise. It was the understanding that she had faced her fears and succeeded. She had taken the leap that she had long imagined and discovered that her passion, her dedication, and her authenticity had the power to move others. This realization gave her a sense of empowerment and confidence she had never felt before. Her family noticed a difference as well. They had always known she loved music, but now they saw the effect it had on others and the pride she carried in herself. Her children, who had grown up hearing her play, began to ask more questions about the pieces she had performed, wanting to understand the emotions behind them. Her spouse remarked that he had never seen her glow in quite the same way, and he felt proud to witness the culmination of years of dedication. These small affirmations added to her sense of accomplishment, reinforcing that her journey was meaningful not only to herself, but to those around her. In the days that followed, she received letters, messages, and calls from people who had attended the performance. Many expressed how moved they had been, describing the music as something that touched their hearts and brought emotions to the surface that they hadn't felt in years. Some shared stories of their own struggles, and how her courage to perform had inspired them to pursue passions they had neglected. She read each message with a sense of gratitude and humility, realizing that her ordinary life had intersected with the lives of many others in a profound and lasting way. She continued to practice at home, but now with a renewed purpose. Each piece she played carried the memory of the audience, the stage, and the emotions she had shared. She explored new compositions, challenged herself with more complex works, and allowed herself to experiment with styles she had never tried before. The piano became not just an instrument, but a bridge to the wider world, a way to express her inner life and to connect with others on a deep level. She felt more alive than ever, knowing that her music could be a source of inspiration, comfort, and joy. Word of her performance spread throughout the community and beyond. Local newspapers and online forums discussed the story, highlighting how an ordinary woman had captured the hearts of a skeptical audience. People who had never thought about pursuing music themselves began to consider taking up an instrument, inspired by the idea that dedication and passion could make a difference regardless of age, background, or appearance. She became a quiet symbol of hope, a reminder that ordinary people were capable of extraordinary things when they believed in themselves and nurtured their talents. Despite the attention, she remained humble. She did not seek fame or accolades. Her goal had never been recognition, but the pure joy of expressing herself through music. She welcomed opportunities to perform again, but she also cherished the quiet moments at home when she could play for herself, uninterrupted, letting her emotions flow freely. She understood that the true reward lay not in applause, but in the connection between her music and the hearts of those who listened. Her journey also inspired those closest to her. Friends who had doubted their own abilities began to reconsider their own dreams. Neighbors asked her to teach them the basics of piano, eager to experience the joy she had cultivated over the years. Her story became a ripple effect, encouraging others to embrace their passions, confront their fears, and trust in their own abilities. She saw firsthand how one person's courage could ignite hope and motivation in others, and it filled her with a profound sense of purpose. In quiet reflection, she often thought back to the very first moment she had considered auditioning. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the small voice inside her that said, "I can do this." That voice had guided her through preparation, performance, and beyond. She realized that it was not the laughter of others, the skepticism, or even her own doubts that defined her. It was her willingness to listen to her own heart and take action. That simple choice had opened doors she had never imagined, and it continued to shape her life in ways both big and small. Over time, she became more involved in the local music community, attending events, offering guidance to aspiring musicians, and occasionally performing at smaller gatherings. Each experience reinforced the lesson she had learned, that the power of music lay not in perfection, but in sincerity, passion, and the courage to share oneself fully. She embraced these opportunities not for personal gain, but to inspire and uplift others, creating a network of support and encouragement that extended far beyond herself. Looking back, she understood that the audition had been a turning point, a moment where ordinary life intersected with extraordinary achievement. The laughter and doubt she had faced initially were now distant memories, replaced by respect, admiration, and a quiet sense of triumph. She had proven, most importantly to herself, that perseverance, dedication, and authenticity could overcome obstacles and create moments of genuine beauty. Her story, once confined to her small apartment and private practice, had become a testament to the potential within every person to reach beyond expectations and touch the lives of others. Days turned into weeks, and the ordinary woman settled back into her routine. But something inside her had shifted forever. She still woke early, still went to work, and still tended to the small chores that structured her day. But now there was a new lightness in her step, a quiet confidence that had not existed before. The piano in her corner seemed to call her more insistently than ever, reminding her that her gift was not a secret anymore, that her music had a place in the world beyond the walls of her apartment. She continued practicing daily, exploring new pieces and refining her technique. But she also began to experiment in ways she had never dared before. She improvised, letting her emotions guide her hands across the keys, discovering melodies that seemed to come from a place deeper than her conscious mind. Each session became an exploration of both skill and heart, and she found that the more she played from her soul, the more alive she felt. The music was no longer just a private refuge, it was a living expression of who she had become, a bridge connecting her inner world to the wider world around her. The response from the local music community continued to inspire her. People who had attended the audition reached out with stories of how her performance had moved them, how it had encouraged them to follow their own passions, or simply given them a moment of emotional clarity in a busy, often overwhelming world. She replied to each message with genuine appreciation, understanding that her music had created ripples far beyond what she could see. It was a humbling realization, but also an energizing one. She felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that sharing her talent could inspire others to confront their own fears and embrace what they loved. Occasionally, she received invitations to perform at local events, charity gatherings, and small concerts. While she had once been hesitant, fearing judgment and scrutiny, she now approached these opportunities with excitement and calm. Each performance was different, each audience unique, but she carried the same philosophy: play honestly, share openly, and let the music speak for itself. Time and again, she was reminded that the true power of music lay not in technical perfection, but in authenticity and the courage to express oneself fully. Her family and friends continued to support her, sharing in her joy and celebrating the quiet victories that came with each new performance. They understood that her life had not changed in material ways. Her apartment remained simple, her work routine steady, but they also recognized that something profound had transformed her spirit. She moved with greater ease, spoke with more confidence, and carried herself with a calm assurance that drew admiration from those around her. Her music had given her more than recognition. It had given her a sense of self-worth and the courage to embrace her potential fully. She also began to mentor others quietly, offering guidance to those who were new to music or uncertain about pursuing their passions. She emphasized that talent alone was not enough, that dedication, patience, and the willingness to face fear were what truly made a difference. She shared her own story candidly, recounting the doubts, the ridicule, and the long nights spent practicing alone, showing that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary results when they dared to step forward. Watching her students grow, gain confidence, and experience the joy of music became a source of immense satisfaction. Despite the recognition and small successes, she remained grounded. She never let applause or praise define her worth. She understood that the value of her journey lay in the personal growth she had experienced and the lives she had touched through her music. She returned often to her small corner at home, playing for herself, savoring the intimacy of the piano, and remembering the sense of wonder and exhilaration from the first audition. That memory remained a touchstone, reminding her of the courage it had taken to take the leap and the rewards that came from believing in herself. Over time, her story began to inspire more than just local musicians. Articles, social media posts, and personal testimonials shared her journey, emphasizing the theme that determination and authenticity could break through doubt and skepticism. People of all ages wrote to her, sharing their own struggles and aspiration, thanking her for reminding them that ordinary individuals could accomplish extraordinary feats. She read these messages with humility and gratitude, realizing that her music had become a symbol of hope and possibility, not just for herself, but for countless others. She found that the act of performing had changed her perspective on life itself. Challenges that once seemed daunting now appeared as opportunities for growth. Mistakes became lessons rather than failures, and doubt became a signal to push further rather than a reason to retreat. The courage she had cultivated through music seeped into every aspect of her daily life, allowing her to navigate difficulties with grace and resilience. She understood that the true triumph was not winning competitions or earning accolades, but the transformation of her own character and the inspiration she could offer to others. Even in quiet moments, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. She remembered the initial skepticism, the whispers, and the laughter she had faced before the first performance, and she realized that those moments had strengthened rather than weakened her. They had forced her to confront fear, to trust her own abilities, and to step into the unknown. In doing so, she discovered that ordinary courage, choosing to act despite uncertainty, could create extraordinary outcomes. This understanding became a guiding principle in her life, shaping the way she approached every decision, every challenge, and every opportunity. Her music continued to evolve, reflecting the depth of her experiences, the growth of her confidence, and the expanding circle of people she had touched. She experimented with new genres, composed original pieces, and collaborated with other musicians, finding joy in shared creativity. Each performance, no matter how small or intimate, carried with it the echoes of that first moment when she dared to play in front of others. The ordinary woman who had once been laughed at had become a symbol of perseverance, authenticity, and the quiet power of following one's passion. As the years passed, she remained committed to her music and to inspiring others, but she also embraced the simplicity of her life. She continued to work, to care for her family, and to maintain her small routines, finding balance between ordinary responsibilities and extraordinary achievements. She understood that life did not require grand gestures to be meaningful. Even small acts of courage, consistency, and passion could leave a lasting impact. Her music was both a reflection of her journey and a testament to the possibility that anyone, regardless of their circumstances, could achieve greatness in their own way. In the end, she often thought about the people who had doubted her, the laughter that had greeted her first steps into the public arena, and the self-doubt that had accompanied her for so long. She felt gratitude rather than resentment, understanding that these challenges had shaped her resolve and deepened her connection to her music. The applause, the admiration, and the recognition were gratifying, but the true reward lay in the personal growth, the courage she had discovered, and the inspiration she could offer to others. The ordinary woman who had once hesitated to share her music with the world had become a source of hope and encouragement. She had proven that determination, passion, and authenticity could transform lives, not only her own but also the lives of those who witnessed her journey. And in every note she played, she carried the story of triumph over doubt, the quiet power of ordinary courage, and the lasting impact of following one's heart fully. Her life remained simple in many ways, but it was enriched with meaning, purpose, and the enduring beauty of music that could touch the world in ways words never could.